Hey there, welcome to Lingora. Let's learn English today with a story you'll never forget. Today, I'm going to tell you the legend of Perseus, a story from ancient Greece. And it's not just about learning new words in English, it's a story that teaches us that we can rise above the circumstances we were born into, and that courage often begins the moment we choose to face our fears. As we go through it together, you'll pick up vocabulary and expressions naturally, the same way you learned your first language, through listening, feeling, and imagination. So get comfortable, and let's begin. Long before empires rose and fell, in a kingdom carved from stone and ambition, there lived a king named Acrisius, a man who ruled with iron will, but trembled before a single truth he could not silence. For an oracle had spoken a prophecy so terrible that it haunted his every waking hour, declaring that a son born to his daughter would one day become the very hand of his death. No army could fight this fate. No wall could keep it out. Yet Acrisius, blind with fear, believed he could outrun the will of the gods themselves. And so he did the unthinkable, sealing his only child, the Princess Danae, inside a tower of solid bronze. Buried beneath the earth, guarded day and night, a prison meant to keep her from ever knowing the touch of man, ever bearing the child destined to end him. Years passed in that tomb of stone, the princess growing older in silence and shadow, her only companions the echo of her own breath and the distant cry of birds she could not see. And though her father believed he had outwitted fate itself, the gods above do not so easily surrender what they have already set into motion, for something far greater than any mortal wall was already beginning to stir. One night, a golden light, warm as fire yet gentle as dawn, poured down through the smallest crack in the tower's roof, filling the chamber with a radiance no mortal eye had ever witnessed. And in that sacred moment, Zeus, king of the gods, descended in secret, choosing Danae not out of cruelty, but out of destiny itself. For what was written could not be unwritten. From that divine union, a child was conceived, a boy who would carry the blood of Olympus in his veins. When Acrisius discovered the truth, when he heard the cry of an infant echoing through the very walls he had built to prevent this exact horror, fury consumed him like wildfire, for the prophecy he had spent a lifetime fleeing had already taken flesh. Unable to bring himself to spill royal blood directly, the king devised a punishment almost crueler than death itself, ordering mother and child sealed inside a great wooden chest and cast into the raging sea, leaving their fate to the mercy of the waves. As the chest struck the water and began to sink beneath the churning storm, it seemed certain that this was the end, that the prophecy would drown alongside the child who carried it, swallowed forever by a merciless sea, answering to no king and no mortal command. Yet the sea did not claim them, for a current far older than kings carried the chest gently toward a distant shore, to the island of Seriphos, where dawn broke softly over calm waters. There, casting his nets in the early light, a humble fisherman named Dictys noticed something strange rising and falling with the tide, and pulling it ashore with rough, calloused hands, he pried open the lid to find a trembling young mother and a sleeping infant nestled safely within. Without hesitation, without asking what storm had brought them to his shore, Dictys took them into his humble home, offering shelter and kindness that asked for nothing in return, raising the boy as though he were his own son and naming him Perseus. Years passed in quiet peace upon that island, and Perseus grew from a curious child into a young man of remarkable strength, courage, and fierce loyalty to the mother who had raised him through hardship, never once suspecting that the blood of Zeus himself ran through his veins, nor that the fate of kings and monsters alike would one day rest upon his shoulders. Peace, as it so often does in stories written by fate, could not last forever, for Seriphos was ruled by a king named Polydectes, a man whose heart held none of the warmth his own brother Dictys had shown to the shipwrecked strangers. Polydectes had watched Danae grow into a woman of quiet grace and beauty, and his desire for her grew alongside his frustration, for Perseus, now grown, stood as an unshakable wall between the king and what he wanted, protective and unwilling to let his mother be forced into a marriage she never chose. Unable to defeat the young man through strength or reason, Polydectes turned to cunning, announcing a grand feast under the pretense of gathering gifts, a trick to see which of the island's men would offer what tribute, and Perseus, driven by pride, declared before the entire court that he would bring the king anything he desired, even the impossible. Polydectes, hiding his triumph behind a courteous smile, demanded the one thing that surely meant death: the severed head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze alone could turn any living creature to stone. The hall fell silent, and Perseus, realizing too late the trap that had closed around him, could not take back his word, for a promise made before witnesses was a promise bound by honor itself. That night, walking alone along the rocky shore where the waves whispered secrets only the sea could know, Perseus stared out at the endless dark horizon, carrying the full, crushing weight of an oath that might cost him his very life. As despair settled heavily over him like a shroud, the very air around him began to shimmer and hum with a power older than mortal understanding, and from the heavens, two radiant figures descended, revealing themselves as Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Hermes, swift messenger of Olympus, who had come to aid the secret son of Zeus in the trial that lay before him. Athena presented him with a shield polished to a mirror's perfect shine, explaining that only through its reflection could he safely face the Gorgon without meeting her deadly gaze directly. Hermes offered a curved blade sharp enough to cut through scales harder than any earthly armor, along with winged sandals that would carry him swiftly across sky and sea alike. With trembling gratitude, Perseus accepted these sacred tools, understanding in that moment that he was no longer merely a fisherman's adopted son, but something touched by the will of the gods themselves, chosen for a purpose far beyond his own understanding. Yet even armed with divine gifts, Perseus did not know where to find the Gorgons, for their lair lay hidden at the very edge of the known world, a place no map could show and no sailor had ever charted. His journey led him first to a cave shrouded in perpetual mist, home to three ancient sisters known as the Graeae, gray and withered, who shared between them a single eye and a single tooth, passing them hand to hand in an endless, weary ritual. These sisters alone knew the secret path to the Gorgons, but they guarded their knowledge fiercely, refusing to speak to any mortal who dared approach. Perseus, quick-witted and unafraid, watched their ritual carefully from the shadows, timing his movement with precision, and in one swift, decisive motion, he reached out and seized the eye mid-exchange, holding their only sight hostage in his palm. The sisters shrieked and clawed at the empty air, blind and desperate, and Perseus offered to return their eye the moment they revealed the hidden path he sought. Trembling with fury and helplessness, the Graeae relented, whispering directions to a distant island shrouded in eternal shadow, a place where stone statues stood frozen in eternal screams, remnants of every warrior who had come before him and failed. The island of the Gorgons rose from the sea like a wound upon the earth, gray and lifeless, littered with statues of warriors frozen mid-scream, each one a silent testament to the countless men who had failed before him. As Perseus landed cautiously upon the jagged rocks, his heart pounding louder than his own footsteps, he raised the mirrored shield, refusing to look directly ahead, watching only the reflected world within its polished surface. There, coiled among the stones, slept Medusa, her hair a writhing mass of serpents, her presence alone enough to freeze the blood of the bravest warrior. Yet Perseus moved with careful, deliberate steps, guided entirely by reflection, until finally, close enough to strike, he raised his blade and brought it down in one swift, decisive motion, ending the Gorgon's ancient curse in a single heartbeat. From her fallen form, in a burst of light and mist, two miraculous beings sprang forth, a magnificent winged horse named Pegasus and a golden warrior named Chrysaor, both born from the very blood of the monster's death. Perseus wasted no time in wonder, for he knew Medusa's immortal sisters would soon wake, and quickly wrapped the severed head in a protective satchel before launching himself into the sky, just as the Gorgon sisters rose shrieking from the rocks below, their monstrous wings beating furiously in pursuit across the darkening sky. Perseus flew faster than fear itself, weaving between storm clouds until the screams of the pursuing sisters faded into the distance behind him. He soared onward for days, crossing unfamiliar deserts and jagged mountain ranges, until, soaring above an unfamiliar coastline, he saw something that stopped his heart mid-flight: a young woman chained to a jagged rock at the very edge of the crashing sea. Her name was Andromeda, offered as a sacrifice to appease the wrath of the gods after her mother's foolish boast of her daughter's beauty. As Perseus descended toward her, the sea itself began to churn with violent fury, and from its depths rose Cetus, a monstrous sea creature summoned to devour the chained girl. The battle that followed shook the very coastline, waves exploding skyward as Perseus dove and struck from above using his winged sandals, weaving between the monster's thrashing coils, while upon the distant cliffs, a grieving crowd who had gathered to witness Andromeda's certain death instead found themselves holding their breath, watching a stranger fight for a life they had already surrendered to despair. Lightning split the storm-darkened sky as Perseus circled higher, gathering momentum for the strike that would decide everything. With one final, desperate dive, Perseus plunged his blade deep into the creature's neck with every ounce of strength and purpose he possessed, and the monster released a thunderous, earth-shaking roar before collapsing beneath the churning waves, its violence extinguished at last. As the storm began to calm and the wild sea settled into gentler waves, Perseus landed beside Andromeda upon the rock, breaking her iron chains with careful, steady hands. And when their eyes finally met, fear transformed into something warm and unspoken that neither of them had words for yet, but that both instinctively understood as the beginning of a bond fate itself had woven between them. The crowd on the cliffs erupted into joyous disbelief, and word of the stranger who had slain the sea monster and freed the sacrificed princess began spreading like wildfire across every kingdom that bordered that coast. Perseus, once merely a fisherman's adopted son fleeing an impossible vow, had become something the world had not seen in generations. A true hero forged not by birthright alone, but by trial, sacrifice, and courage proven beneath a stormy, unforgiving sky. And now, with Andromeda beside him, he turned his path back toward home, unaware that one final reckoning still awaited him there. Perseus returned home to Seriphos at last, no longer the uncertain young man who had once made a foolish, prideful vow before a mocking court, but a hero forged by trial and hardened by battles that would echo through legend for generations to come. When he strode into the palace hall, the king could only laugh in disbelief, certain the boy had perished in the Gorgon's lair. But with calm, terrible resolve, Perseus lifted Medusa's severed head high before the entire court, and in a single, devastating instant, laughter turned to stone in every throat, justice arriving through the full, unstoppable weight of prophecy finally fulfilled. He placed the crown rightfully upon Dictys, the humble fisherman who had shown him kindness when the world had offered only cruelty. Years later, at a grand athletic competition in a distant kingdom, a sudden gust of wind seized a discus mid-flight during a friendly game, sending it spinning into the crowd and striking an elderly stranger. And kneeling beside the dying man, Perseus discovered too late that the stranger was Acrisius himself, the grandfather whose fear had set this entire legend into motion. And so the prophecy that once tore a family apart found its ending not through malice, but through fate's own quiet, unstoppable hand. And Perseus, hero of Greece, slayer of Medusa, savior of Andromeda, went on to build a kingdom of his own, and when at last his mortal life came to its end, the gods placed him among the eternal stars, where to this very night his constellation still rises, remembered forever as legend. Every one of us carries something we're afraid of, But like Perseus, we can turn that fear into the courage that shapes who we become. If you enjoyed learning English through this story, subscribe to Lingora, and let's explore more adventures just like this one.